Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first event in the MUVA webinar series called Gender and Innovative Financing for Skills Development Interventions, in which we will have the opportunity to hear from a wonderful panel of experts and practitioners about how to incentivize a focus on women's economic empowerment in innovative financing. Before I go any further, I would like to highlight that simultaneous interpretation into Portuguese and closed captioning is available for this event. We're joined by Sandra Tamel, who will be interpreting for us today. If you would like to listen in Portuguese, please go to your controls at the bottom of your screen and select the globe icon. From there, you can choose Portuguese. If you're joining from a phone, please note that the setup for interpretation is a little different. On your phone, you will need to click on the options menu, represented by the 3 dots on your screen. Click on interpretation, select your language, and then accept that choice by clicking done. If you would like to access captions, you will need to select either subtitles or CC at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions or problems, please write a message in the chat and our technical team will be happy to assist you with this. So to begin, I'd like to introduce myself and say a few words about the MUVA program and this webinar series. My name is Magali Correct, and I'm the project manager for MUVA at Oxford Policy Management, or OPM. MUVA was launched in 2015 as a flagship women's economic empowerment program financed by the Department for International Development, now called the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and implemented by OPM. The program, delivered in Mozambique, was designed based on principles of innovation, learning, and adaptation. And over the past 7 years, it has piloted 24 different approaches to women's economic empowerment. Through these pilots and the findings which have emerged from them, MUVA has contributed to significant changes in both policy and practice on women's economic empowerment in Mozambique and beyond. We are extremely proud of the work that we and our numerous partners have done over the years. And although the MUVA program is now winding down, a national Mozambican NGO, also called MUVA, has been created to continue the work begun under the MUVA program, thanks to the support of multiple donors. To celebrate the rich learnings coming from MUVA, we're delighted to be able to host this series of webinars. They allow MUVA to showcase its work and continue to dialogue with development partners on key issues related to women's economic empowerment. This is the first in a series of 7 webinars, which will take place over the course of the next few months, and which will touch on a range of subjects related to entrepreneurship, labor market insertion, the importance of soft skills trainings, and economic inclusion, among other themes. We hope you will be able to join us for all of them. So, without any further delay, it's my pleasure to now hand the mic over, so to speak, to Divya Nambiar, who is a senior consultant and leader of the Skills, Livelihoods, and Education Systems Hub within OPM's education practice. Divya will facilitate today's discussion. Over to you, Divya.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to you all for the first of the MUVA webinar series. I'm Divya Nambiar, and I lead OPM's global work in the area of skills, livelihoods, and education systems. And I'm really pleased to facilitate this panel discussion today. We have a really exciting lineup of speakers, and we're speaking about gender and innovative financing for skill development interventions. And I think it's really timely to have this topic as the starting point for the webinar series for 2 reasons. First, as we end the MUVA program and capture all the rich lessons that we've learned from it, We're also in the beginning of starting a new program where OPM has been selected as the evaluation partner for the Skill Impact Bond. So this is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn from what we've done in MUVA and also to share those insights and lessons and learn from the fellow panelists who also bring with them very rich and diverse experience. This discussion will be structured with a quick 5-minute introduction from each of the panelists. I request each panelist to maybe begin with a quick introduction to yourself, and then if you can present your perspective on the big question that we're discussing. And following that, we will then go into discussing some of the sub-questions around creating partnerships for impact on different kinds of innovative financing models, and how do we focus on gender and drive gender-based outcomes. Meanwhile, I'm sure through the discussion, we'll also have a lot of questions. So please do feel free to interact with each other. My role is just to facilitate the conversation. And we'd also like to spend the last 10 minutes or so opening out the panel discussion to the audience as well. But I'd also like to request the audience, if you do have questions, please do use the chat feature if you can access it, so that we can hear your questions and maybe factor that into our responses as well. So thank you all, and over now to the panelists. I request Yana to please kickstart with your introduction and your perspective on the topic.
Thank you, Divya. Hello all, very happy to be here with all these great fellow panelists. My name is Yana. I'm, as Divya said, an entrepreneurship specialist working with MUVA program since its inception. My background is on financial markets, so I led the scoping study we did with social finance to understand the possibility of setting out innovative financing models in Mozambique to address the constraints youth and young women face to access decent economic opportunities. The work looked at MUVA's experience and our own models and built the models from there. So in terms of the question of how to incentivize the focus on women's economic empowerment when building an innovative financing model, what we found when we were building the models with social finance is that it's important to have 3 things. The first one is to have a deliberate gender focus. So programs that do contain a gender element tend to focus on reaching a target number of women through existing interventions, rather than developing a more transformational approach. We know now from a big body of evidence, and from MUVA's evidence included, that having a transformational approach is rather important to reach the end goal, especially when working with disadvantaged young women. So from MUVA's experience, a transformational approach is bundled, which addresses technical skills gaps, the lack of access to opportunities, and develops the agency needed to thrive in the labor market. It's also equally committed to improve technical and soft skills, as well as on-the-job mentoring, things that disadvantaged women do require also to thrive in the labor market, either through entrepreneurship or through formal work. A transformational approach is also focused on both supply and demand for jobs, not either one or the other. The second thing is that when designing a sector-focused skills training program, for instance, focus on oil and gas development to stay in the Mozambican context, it's paramount to understand if the sector needs a highly skilled workforce as opposed to an entry-level workforce, and if the sector is typically male-dominated. If those are the cases, you might want to assess whether it's feasible to achieve the expected results in terms of women's economic empowerment within the time frame of the program. And the third thing is that it's important to acknowledge where most of the young women working are. In Mozambique, for instance, funders are very reluctant to engage with the informal sector. And while there seems to be a focus on the promotion of entrepreneurship and supporting early stage entrepreneurs, there is very limited available funding for informal micro enterprises, which limits them to improve and climb the social entrepreneurship pyramid. The problem is that most of the women entrepreneurs have actually informal micro enterprises. So if we want, for instance, to incentivize women's economic empowerment in an innovative financing model in Mozambique, through entrepreneurship, we need to be able to work with the sector. So this comes from MUVA's experience working with women's economic empowerment for the past 7 years, as Magali said, and also this scoping study on innovative financing models that we did with social finance. But I'm sure the other panelists have other experiences and context-oriented ideas, Divya, so I'm very keen to hear from them.
Thank you, Ayana. That's a wonderful way to kickstart with MUVA's experience and your experience in the area. And now over to Jalil, and we look forward to just a quick introduction from you on your background, because I think it's really fascinating, your experience of designing the Palestine DIB, and then if you can share some early thoughts on the question. Over to you, Jalil.
Thank you, Divya. Hi, everyone. Happy to join you all. My name is Jalil. I am the Executive Director of the Finance for Jobs Development Impact Bond. Just like Divya said, I had the unique opportunity of helping design this Employment Development Impact Bond, which is funded by the World Bank. It is the first World Bank skills development and employment DIB in the world. The World Bank started in 2015 and 16 to think about innovative financing for youth employment in the country. So they tasked social finance in the UK to design this, and I was with them in the early days. After this design exercise was over, and we found our investors, we started the Finance for Jobs Consulting Services, which is tasked with implementation of the DIB. We launched the DIB alongside COVID. So it was a unique opportunity to implement this new innovative financing mechanism alongside COVID. My background is education and skills development, in multiple projects and in teaching at university level. But this is a different task and challenge, because you're trying to keep your eye on the end goal, which is employment. And when you want to focus on women employment in particular, it becomes even more challenging. Palestine is a little bit fragile, a context, a small country torn with conflict and war. When you're talking about female participation in education, it is extremely high. It is above 70% of those in education and higher education in particular are females, are women. But when you're talking about employment and economic empowerment, it's the complete opposite. It's devastating. We have one of the lowest female participation rates in the labor force in the globe. No more than 16 to 19% female participation. So when we launched this DIB, just like Yana mentioned, it is key to agree to what you want to achieve from a gender perspective. So we agreed with the World Bank to a minimum 30% female participation, which is double the local average. We have maintained above 45% to 50% so far. It is key to keep in mind that it's easy to train female and women in skills development. It's easy to train them. We can maintain 70% women participation, but can we translate this into jobs and startups and economic empowerment? It's a completely different story. And when we're working in different sectors, male-dominant sectors, it becomes completely difficult, especially when we're working in TVET. So I think the key thing is to agree, what do you want to achieve? And be completely blind to sectors and the way we want to achieve it, because our partners on the ground will have better experience than we do. In summary, donors are usually focused on how they want to achieve things. In development impact bonds and innovative financing, you have to step away a little bit and allow your partners to be innovative and come up with the solutions on the ground. And this is what we have been doing. Maybe we can discuss this further when we go to the questions, Divya.
Thank you very much, Jalil. And I think that's a great segue into Vandana's introduction. And because I could see her nodding and smiling when you were speaking, because I think these are some of the very challenges that Vandana is dealing with as well. So over to you, Vandana.
Yeah, thank you, Divya, and thank you, Magali, for setting this up, setting this panel, and giving the opportunity. It's so exciting to hear what Iana shared and what Jalil shared. I think I can resonate so much and relate so much to what they've shared. So in my introduction, I'm Vandana Bahri, and apologies for my bad throat. I've been having issues with it since yesterday. I lead the impact investment portfolio for NSDC since a year and a half back. By education and training, I'm a chartered accountant. So I'm a financial expert and have worked in skill development as a domain for more than a decade now. And currently in NSDC, which is one of the largest risk investor in skill development for Government of India, works as nodal agency to implement world's largest skill development scheme for youth. So I manage the impact investment portfolio for them, and I think Jalil and I share something in common, that the DIB, the development impact bond that we are now implementing, I have seen this through the lens of an outcome funder as well. And now I'm on the other side, leading the implementation for NSDC as a risk investor. So I think from NSDC's perspective, we knew that, absence of relevant hard skills and soft skills and lack of practical experience was one of the main factors that attributed to high unemployment of youth in India. It is as high as 47%. And we also knew that, women are disproportionately employed in traditional sectors. And the employment rate, Jalil, is also as low as 16% in India currently post-COVID, which was just 23% pre-COVID. So we also had this high, low labor force participation, of women in India. And with this data, the Government of India has been making consistent efforts since so many decades, by creating enough and more capacity and supporting skill development for millions of youth in past few decades. However, what we were seeing that despite much of efforts and support by Government of India, 90% of women who enroll into the program did not take up jobs and did not complete even 3 months of employment. So what Jalil said, I completely echo that theory, that it's easy to enroll women into a program such as skill development, but it's difficult. But it wasn't really enough what we were doing to really see the transition, for these women into jobs and placement. So there were significant dropouts that we were seeing during training and employment. And our analysis during the designing of impact bonds suggested that largely it was because of the misplaced financial incentives of service providers that attributed to a complete lack of focus on outcomes, especially for women. Because majority of the government support that was going to service providers was linked to output, was linked to training completion, and service providers, they had sized their service offerings to fit within that 80% of funding and be profitable. So the service providers or the ecosystem really remained uninvested and did not really think of innovations, did not really think of improving outcomes, especially for women. But we truly believe that impact bond is the most appropriate instrument to push the agenda of innovation, especially in the skilling ecosystem, and especially to push the agenda for girls and young women, because the idea is to shift the focus on outcomes and promoting innovation in a very low risk environment. The skill impact is, as Divya said, is by far the largest impact bond in India by value of $16 million. And we aim to impact 30,000 youth, of which 62% would be women. So we are being very ambitious, Jalil. We've targeted 62% coverage for women in this impact bond, and we'll cover it over a 4-year period in a very iterative delivery model to innovate various models of skilling and create evidence to really understand what works for youth, especially for women, and at what cost. And for NSDC, this is a very unique opportunity because as a nodal agency for Government of India, what we would learn from the impact bond, especially from the evidences that OPM would generate for us, both especially the learning agenda, it will be highly useful for us to influence future policies around skill development so that every penny of government grant that gets invested into such programs delivers outcomes for youth, especially for women, around their jobs and their retention. And at NSDC, we are experimenting many other innovative instruments on entrepreneurship and for setting up accelerator platforms for women to push the agenda for women. And happy to speak further during our conversation today. So over to you, Divya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vandana, for that great introduction. And now over to Anushri, because we heard about the ecosystem, and Anushri's key role is to sort of drive outcomes and bring actors in the ecosystem together. So Anushri, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Divya. Hello, everyone. Divya and OPM team, thank you very much for bringing us all together. It was a much required forum for us to hear perspectives from all different countries and really learn and cross-fertilize. Also, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Just as a quick introduction, I lead and manage some of British Asian Trust's social finance projects in India, including the Skill Impact Bond. The British Asian Trust was set up in 2007 by His Royal Highness Prince of Wales and a group of British Asian diaspora business leaders. We basically serve India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. And the idea is for the diaspora community in the UK to really give back and aid the growth and development of their home countries. With that intent, we actually have a social finance unit which pioneered social financing globally and in India. And as part of that, our first project was launching world's largest education development impact bond, which was called Quality Education India Development Impact Bond, which is now actually coming to a close this year. On back of those learnings, we obviously then helped design, facilitate, orchestrate, and launch the Skill Impact Bond, which has now become world's largest impact bond in TVET, right? So the trajectory really, the intent really has been to bring disruptive, innovative approaches where required to solve deeply entrenched, sticky, wicked problems, right? The intent is always to respond to the need, not be an instrument-led organization or an approach, but to respond to the need on the ground. Now, the way that plays out for women's economic empowerment in India is thus, right? And before I get into it, just reiterating some of the high-level stats that, Vandana also shared, just to help understand the context and, the extent of issue in India with women's economic empowerment, right? So as Vandana said, we've never done very well on our labor force, female labor force participation rate. It has been falling for over a decade. It has been hovering around 20% or so, which means that only 1 in 5 women are either working or even looking for a job, right? Now, this is one of the lowest female labor force participation rates in the entire world. And we are in fact behind some of our immediate neighbors, such as Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And obviously, sort of not kind of withstanding the current crisis in Sri Lanka, but we've been really lagging. Now, this was only exacerbated by COVID, right? So this was already quite an urgent crisis, urgent and important crisis, and COVID came and kind of worsened it. So there was a report by Azim Premji University that showed that during the first lockdown, which happened in India in around 2020, early part of 2020, only 7% of men lost their jobs in the formal sector. We're not even talking about informal sector, compared to 47% of women who lost their jobs and did not return to work by end of 2020, right? So just shows you the extent of disproportionate impact that COVID had on women's employment. If you see the female labor force participation rate around this period, right, it actually, as Vandana mentioned, it actually dipped to almost 15-16%, and then it recovered a bit, but that was really the extent of impact that COVID had. Now, that's the issue side of it. If you look at the budgets for this, right, now I don't have granular data, but broadly speaking, if you just look at gender budgets in India, around 5% of our union or central budget is actually dedicated or spent on schemes that benefit women, right? In dollar value, this would be close to $19 billion in 2021, right? Now, not all of this is spent on employment. It would include housing, it would include nutrition, but two of the largest schemes in employment, which is your rural Manrega scheme, which is rural employment, and the National Livelihoods Rural Mission, both of these account for a significant proportion of the central finance or the central budgets. It also includes the budget spent on other flagship schemes like the PMKVY, which is the flagship TVET scheme in India, which roughly has a budget, Vandana, correct me if I'm wrong, of around $400 million or so. Now, this is public financing. Add to this private financing, right, which is CSR or philanthropic money that flows into women's economic empowerment. That would be another maybe $100 million a year. CSR is roughly around 50 million to TVET schemes per year. And if you look at philanthropic foundation, etc., roughly assuming that that's also 50 million. So around 100 million from philanthropy, 400 million kind of dedicated per year to TVET, plus obviously a big chunk of the central union budgets. So resources were there, right? When we started looking at this, we said there are budgets. These are significant budgets, may still not be adequate to cover the extent of the problem, but very significant budgets. So the issue was not about more money into this sector, right? The problem or the challenge we were trying to solve for is more efficient, effective use of this money such that you're incentivizing outcomes, right? Again, the second issue that Vandana said was that the financial incentives were misplaced. So this was an ideal place to actually have an instrument like a DIP. Now, when we started thinking about this, we started thinking about demand, supply, and ecosystem level challenges. And we realized that no single stakeholder in the country, no matter how well intentioned or how deep their pockets are, can solve for this problem. It required a multi-stakeholder perspective, and which is where BAT came in with that role to say, let's convene the key stakeholders around the table. Let's build consensus of what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, what is the solution around this, what is our shared vision, and how do we achieve this via the instrument of a development impact bond. So I'll talk about how the orchestration of that partnership in itself has generated a lot of learnings for us, even in the initial phase. And we've just launched last year, so just bear in mind that we're very early into this journey, but I'll share that. But as an introduction, I think that is the role that BAT has always played on all impact bonds. Is the convener, is kind of the transaction manager, the middleman, the backbone agency, whatever you want to call it, right? And we'll get into the details of it. But for now, Divya, passing this on to you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Anushree. And I think throughout these introductions, we've got a very clear sense of the case for development impact bonds, and why, and how they really focus on incentivizing outcomes. And I'm mindful of time. So what I'm going to do is sort of ask two questions to kickstart the discussion. And this is really focusing on employment, employability. And by employment, I'm looking at both self-employment and entrepreneurship, but also employment in the formal sector. So I was wondering whether the panelists could sort of look at two big questions that we have when we talk about development impact bonds and skills. One is, now, how do program implementers engage with employers to incentivize a focus on women's employment? Could you give us any examples of any challenges you faced and how they resolved? Because it's really crucial to bring that in. And linked to that is, how do you have any examples of any change management strategies? Because you're introducing a huge change in the ecosystem. Any examples of any strategies to drive this change would also be really useful. So two questions to kickstart our discussion. And we'll start with Jana and then move on in the same order.
Sure. So thank you, Divya. On the first question, we, as I said, the experience we bring is from our employability projects and entrepreneurship projects, which are not innovative financing models per se, but still very interesting, I think. So as we work with both supply and demand for jobs, before developing the skills trainings, we actually ask employers what they are looking for and what they lack of when hiring, for instance, entry-level youth. Right in the beginning of MUVA, what we found, we did several inception phase researches and reports. And what we found out is that what they were actually looking for was a certain employability attitude and soft skills, not really the hard skills we thought they were like paramount to guarantee a job placement for the youth, but rather actually the right attitude and a certain like soft skills level. So we specialized on that and built our interventions out of this contribution, keeping a very close relationship with the employer, which in some projects guarantee a job or internship position for the youth we train. One interesting thing is that very often the hard skills the employers actually are up to be teaching if they find and get to hire people with soft skills and employability skills they are looking for. So I won't, since we don't have an innovative financing focus, I won't hijack the conversation. So over to you, Divya, and to the fellow panelists.
Great, thank you. And I'm really keen to hear about, Jalil, how you dealt with this, because in our chat, we spoke a lot about this important focus on, speaking to employers. And then after that, Vandana, if you can come in with your perspective, that'd be great. And lastly, Anish.
Thank you, Divya. So you asked two questions about the multi-stakeholder partnerships and change management. So first of all, I would like to just make sure that we know who the stakeholders are. And usually when we start a project, we focus on investors, we focus on outcome funders, and we forget youth and we forget employers. I'm not saying that we don't deal with them in implementation, we do, but it's an afterthought. So it is key to keep in mind that these are the two major stakeholders. Investors and outcome funders are two parts of the equation that serve them. In terms of innovative financing, I think we do two things. So there is an outcomes funding pot that is allocated for certain tariffs. So we have agreed with the stakeholders, mainly the outcome funders, that investors whom I represent are going to be paid for youth being accepted into the program, receiving certain employment services, training, and whatnot. And then the key payments are going to be tied to very specific employment triggers. So job start, 3 months into employment and sustainment, and then 6 months of employment sustainment. Two things we've done. First, we have paid, or we are being paid, a premium for female employment as compared to male employment to incentivize to incentivize that angle of women empowerment. And then we have capped outputs. Of the outcomes pot, we are paid up to 40% only for training outputs. Otherwise, we can continue to train females endlessly. I mean, it's very easy, but then that limits the possibility of scale and profitability for investors, although they are social investors. So among our 4 investors are the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, FMO, which represents the Netherlands Development Bank, PIF, the Palestinian Investment Fund, and the Palestinian investors who are based in Chile, the Diaspora Fund. So bringing these 4 investors together was key. But we have to agree where we're going. It is employment, not training. Training is the means to an end. The second thing that is in terms of your question about change management, there was a serious focus on skills training, which is all over the world. I've worked with several donors in the past and in multiple countries, especially in the Gulf. And there is always a lot of training going on, whether it's soft skills, whether it's technical skills. And I agree with you on the fact that soft skills is what is more needed. But I think what we have been doing in the past year is moving away slightly from training and adding more individualized services, especially in the era of COVID, where people hide in, such our meeting, people hide. If you're doing training online and you have 18, 20 people, 3 are interactive and the rest are either, I don't know, sleeping or not even listening. And we have witnessed this firsthand in some of our trainings. So we had to intervene through one-on-one services, mainly job skills, job matching, job placement, and more importantly, case management. And this is something that everybody was concerned with. Where is the training? Where is the skills development? And often for women who are marginalized, it's not the skills training they need. It is the connection with employers. They don't have a network. They might have a CV. They might apply to jobs, but they need someone to hold their hand and make a matchmaking case for them. And this is what we have been trying to experiment with, although it will take time to see results. So this is one of the key changes we're trying to instill right now. Back to you, Divya.
Thank you so much, Jalil. And I wonder, Vandana, what your thoughts are on these questions.
Yeah, thanks. And I completely agree with what Jalil said, because I think some of the principles we also saw and implemented when we are now implementing the first cohort of the Skill Impact One. I'll pick the second question first on the change management. I think there were some changes that we adopted at the design stage when we were choosing the programs, when we were choosing the partners. So we consciously chose service providers who had done skilling for women, who had some track record of performing on employment and retention for women. So we consciously chose them because we had agreed a 62% coverage, in the impact bond. So we wanted to help those partners scale up and innovate further. So choice of partners was consciously designed around them, and also choice of programs. When we decided the cohort one, there are 5 service providers, and we've adopted a portfolio approach, which means each partner has a different training model, and we are piloting and experimenting each of these different models for youth and for women. But within that, we are consciously co-chosen the programs that we believe have demand for women and have, I think, supporting environment which would ensure retention of women, into the jobs. So choice of program was consciously done collectively with the service providers. And I think on the implementation side, one of the change that we have seen, it's too early for us to really comment on it, because we await to get the validation done from the OPM, experts from OPM. But I think what we've seen is that partners are consciously adopting a demand-led model. They are mobilizing candidates for which they are able to confirm employment, at the end of 3 months of training. So it's completely a demand-led model. They are engaging with employers, to give a bulk placement of say 30, 40 candidates at the batch level. So I think that's very consciously gone into the mind. The community engagement has also evolved to engage more with parents, because it takes that much of effort to enroll more women into the program. So on the counseling, on the delivery side, we've seen a lot of changes from the partner to see that women enroll for the program. She completes the training program. So the training locations are very local, very within the community, so that the girl doesn't have to travel much, commute much, and has a risk. She doesn't have a risk of dropout during training program. And I think the other element that we've kept, for gender focus at the design stages, what Jalil also said, is a financial premium for impacting more women. So what the outcome funders are paying us as risk investor for women is a little higher than what they're paying for women. So there's a premium for us. And last is there's a gender flow cap. The outcome funders have ensured that there isn't, because it's an 8-year cohort program, and they're paying us for each cohort. The design covers that we are not over investing, in men as we start the journey over the 8 cohorts. So there are gender flow caps that we've agreed for with the outcome funders. So I think these are some of the change management that we've done consciously to see that the focus remains on women. And I think on the first question, how are implementers engaging with employers? I think they are really understanding the skill set requirements. What do you need, for the worker to perform at the end of 3 months program, integrating that very consciously into the training program, mobilizing the right set of candidates, especially women. And I think that seems to be working fine, but we await to get validation around this model through the experts of OPM. And the other is, we've seen there are early signs of new sectors or new job roles in the manufacturing sector, where employers have said that women are more productive than men. So give us more women, for manufacturing job roles. So I think that's something that'll be a big achievement if we are able to if OPM experts are able to validate that fact. But I think what we are hearing from employers is productivity. They want to pay for productivity. They want to invest for productivity. And hence they want to, focus for women. So I think these are some of the methods, what we've seen in the early stages of our program are working fine, seem to be working fine.
Thank you so much, Vandana. It's really useful insights. And I wonder, Anushree, if you can come in and when you speak, if you could also tell us what does it take then to build these strong multi-stakeholder partnership to really incentivize this focus on women's empowerment. I think that'll be very helpful as well.
Thank you, Divya. And I'm going to actually skip the first question because I think, between Yana, Jalil and Vandana, they've really covered all the relevant points. On change management, I want to bring in the funder perspective, right? So we've spoken about implementation partners, we've spoken about employers, but essentially in a structure like a development impact bond, a few things fundamentally change the way, turn things on the head, right, for funders, right? So I think Jalil mentioned the fact that as an outcome funder, you become hands-off. Right, you ensure obviously that the risk investors in the project management unit, have a robust process to identify the right models, identify the right partners, and on a day-to-day basis, problem solve and course correct. But you are paying for outcomes, you are paying for results. So you stop micromanaging. And now this is an issue in any funder ecosystem, including India, right? If you see typical traditional grants, actually have a lot of funders, micromanaging monthly reports, quarterly reports, tell us what have you done rather than what have you achieved. Now, this mindset shift among funders to say, we are paying for outcomes. inputs and activities are not something that we will obsess over, right? Yes, we will make sure that they're robust, but our focus is on outcomes, right? So we will ask questions on whether outcomes have been met, what has been effective, what has not been effective while meeting outcomes, while leaving the day-to-day working with, you know, the risk investors and the project management unit. So that is one kind of change management that, you know, as convener of a consortium, as, you know, people who brought together this coalition at very early stages, this was one change management that BAT had to really do, especially with, you know, domestic funders who were coming into an impact bond structure for the first time. We have on this consortium people who have not participated in an impact bond, so we had to really hold their hands to make them understand what it means to, you know, participate in an impact bond in a very strategic way, where you are asking the right questions to get to the outcomes that you desire. So that was one. The other piece, which, you know, Divya, you've been kind of, you know, fully privy to, is the importance that monitoring, evaluation, and learning gets in a structure like this, which again requires change management from all stakeholders, right? So the funders, it's all data driven, it's all evidence driven, and it is basically everything within the design, the execution speaks to the data, right? So without the right data and without the right evidence, decisions don't get taken, right? Now, for evaluators, for monitoring, evaluation, and learning, to be right there up front and center rather than as an afterthought, which is again what traditional grants have generally done, right? You would do a end line at the end, you'd evaluate the program once it's over. You don't come into co-design almost, you know, the iterative, the embedded way of in which monitoring, evaluation, and learning happens. That required change management, and it requires on an ongoing basis, right? Because people have to understand the importance of that and feed into the design in real time. So it is challenging and messy because, you know, you're working on timelines, you're working on priorities. Each stakeholder is playing a unique role, but their role impacts the other stakeholder, right? So that was a second big change management piece that, you know, as again conveners, we had to do. The third piece, I think, Divya, is more the ecosystem level, not at the level of this initiative, but to realize and invest in the role of a transaction manager, right? Now, in many cases, this role that we play, which is this convener, backbone entity, could be seen as dead weight, right? Like, we are middlemen. What are we doing? We are bringing people together. Yes, we help mobilize resources in the initial stages, but as the design and execution happen, we hold it together. Now, this is a very nuanced, underappreciated role, and the value of that role is not easily quantifiable and therefore not easily justifiable, right? If this was the PE, you know, financial word, I would have said, if I'm an investment advisor to you, I would increase your returns by X%. As a transaction manager, as an advisor, technical manager on this, I don't have the equivalent to say, because of, you know, us being a convener here, we added X percentage value to this project. Now, so it's very difficult to justify, but in the initial stages, right, especially when you're doing something as a pilot mode, it is absolutely quintessential to have this role being played by someone. It could be an entity, it could be just, you know, a body of, you know, the stakeholders who are already there, like outcome investors and outcome funders and risk investors, but obviously maintaining independence and neutrality, and having, you know, safeguarding the interest, as Jalil said, of the trainees, being accountable. We hold ourselves accountable to the trainees. Yes, we have responsibilities towards all the consortium members, but that role is very critical to make sure that, you know, we are again course correcting, problem solving, building consensus, seeing the big picture, showing others the big picture, and making sure that beyond, you know, just funders coming together on this project and achieving the outcomes, how are we moving the ecosystem, right? The idea is not for the 16 million impact bond to stay like that. The idea is for the 16 million impact bond to then influence that, you know, multi-million schemes that, you know, I spoke about. Now, that can only happen if somebody has that big picture in mind and it's somebody's mandate to deliver on that, right? So again, as a convener, we have put together the consortium with a lot of thought. So we have NSDC who really holds the baton on, you know, our schemes. We have private sector in outcome funders, for them. Really, it is about using their CSR and philanthropic money and getting a sort of bang for the buck. We have risk investors here where, obviously, they bring in that expertise in Tibet, both with NSDC and with MSDF. They have domain expertise. We have you as our evaluators who again bring in not just the evaluation expertise, the research expertise, but also your technical expertise on the skilling ecosystem and your ability to draw from your global experience, right? We have our training partners who were selected with a lot of rigor. The coming together of this is not coincidental. It was very, very conscious, right? So it was by design. And that's the role that we continue to play to bring in, these and to get the best out of each so that everybody's playing to their strength. So I'm just going to stop here. But all of this basically was towards that change management that you spoke about, Divya. Thank you.
Absolutely, Anushri. Totally agree. And it's been a great learning experience and a bit of change management for us too as evaluators. So it's a wonderful learning experience. I know we have just a few minutes left. Any last concluding, any point that any panelist has to say? We don't have any questions on chat. So I'm just open to any of the panelists if you want to add anything. And then finally over to Magali. But
I would like to hear from Iana more on, some of the other innovative instruments that have been implemented in the entrepreneurship space, because as NSDC, we are in the process of designing something, to support women entrepreneurs. Happy to connect offline, but anything that you have quick to share with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. So MUVA, so we did a couple of interventions throughout what we call the entrepreneurship pyramid, right? So we have a bulk of, in Mozambique, we have a bulk of micro entrepreneurs in the bottom of the pyramid that sell like informal traders that sell produce in the market, like informal markets, right? So we have a specific intervention for those ones that focuses on all MUVA's interventions focuses on skills training, like hard skills training, soft skills and agency, and also access to opportunities. So we don't have any interventions that don't have this bundled approach, right? So for those ones, we have a financial literacy and business development component, a soft skills for entrepreneurship component that was built on the personal initiative training that was like a big RCT made by the World Bank. I don't know if you know about it. And the component, the access to opportunities component was, of course, focusing on improving their outcomes, their income actually, and but also helping them to open a bank account, for instance. And this was very hand-holding, very important for them. So they were able to separate their money between their business and also their individual expenses. We have approaches with also what we call the more dynamic micro enterprises, which are female-led, also formal. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal, where we focus on an acceleration program to help them to grow their businesses in a way where they are able to employ more people, they're able to increase their income, they're able to also grow and be more innovative. And we're very concerned with the target group we work with, because the intervention that we do with the informal traders is not the same one that we do with the young, very dynamic, informal micro enterprises, although they're all micro enterprises for a donor's perspective, for instance. And we are now launching a new intervention with more structured enterprises to support job creation through SMEs. So we have several different projects and names around those target groups, but those are the main areas we've been working with at the moment.
Thank you, Yana, and we're very happy to connect you to Vandana as well, and we can continue this offline. But just want to say thank you all so much for such a rich and stimulating discussion. I know I have a lot of questions, so we'll connect offline as well. But over to Magali for any concluding points. But a warm thanks to all.
Thank you, Divya, for leading such an interesting discussion for us today, and many, many thanks to our panelists. It was really fascinating to learn from your experiences, and you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you as well to you, our audience, for joining us today. As mentioned at the beginning, this is the first in a series of 7 webinars, which will take place until early June. The next webinar is on digital literacy and employment, and it will take place in just 2 weeks' time on the 4th of May. And the following webinar will be just 1 week later on adaptive management and MEL on May 14th. So we will be circulating more information about these events in the coming days. So please be on the lookout for the details, including the registration link. And so with that, I want to thank you all again for joining us today. A special thanks to our wonderful panelists, and I wish you all a very lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.